Hello, my name's Nick, and I'm a big old fan of Blender. I've been using it for a few years, and I'll just drop a few pictures around of my previous work to give you an idea of the level I'm at now. And when I started learning Blender, I was learning at 2.789, I think it was, and then 2.8, and they look different to how the latest version that I'm using as of this video, which is version 3.5. So at least if you're brand new to Blender, there'll be a set of tutorials to get you going that look exactly like the software you're currently looking at. So let's get straight into it, shall we? So when you open Blender for the first time, you're going to see this, everyone's favorite, the default cube. And when I started, I wanted to get straight in with moving around and having a look in this viewport window here. So that's what I'm going to do. And the next ones we'll talk about the semi-boring bits, the outliner and the settings and the rest, and then we'll move on to making something, or at least talking about how to make something. So first thing is to select an object. To select our wonderful default cube, just hover over it, click left click, brush. If you don't see this, I've only got this on for this tutorial series. I don't normally have it on, but if you don't have this on and you want it on, up here, this menu here, under Object Gizmos, just check Move, and then you'll see this. So yeah, to select it, you press left click. If you want to move it, just press G, like this, and you can move it anywhere you like. My key presses are down here, by the way. I'm not sure if it's gonna do my, it is doing my controls good. So that's how to move it. To rotate it, you just press R, and then there it is rotating. We'll talk about the specifics about doing things like this in the 3D space once I just get through these. So yeah, G, R, and then S is to scale. These are the three that you're going to use all the time. And it's just scale and move the mouse. One important thing, if I scaled and I was trying to scale it just a tiny bit, or I've got it here but I only want it a bit bigger, it's hard to do that by minutely moving your hand. But if you hold shift while you're moving your mouse, you see if I let go of shift, it's crazy. If I hold shift, it's nice. So you can fine tune things by holding shift, and that works for anything. If I'm moving with G, I hold shift, it limits it. If I'm rotating it, again, hold shift, it limits it. So that's how to move, scale, and rotate. Now let's talk about moving around the viewports. If you click middle mouse button and move your mouse, you're going all over the place, panning about all over the place. If you hold shift while you do that, so I've pressed shift and then I'm middle clicking my mouse and moving it, you're panning left and right, up and down. If you press control and move up and down, you're zooming in and out. And if you, so control mouse up and down, that will zoom you in and out. If you press anything, say S, scale, and then you hold control instead of shift, because shift will make it the increment smaller, the scaling more refined. If I hold control, it will scale in increments that I'll have set in the snapping, which we'll get to later. So you can see it's jerking, and that's following the increments I've set. So yeah, if I wanted to look at this point at the back, first I'd middle mouse and pan it about, shift and middle mouse to pan it, and then just roll my mouse wheel. That's normally how I do this. I very, very rarely control and move in it. For zoom in, it just seems more work than is necessary when I can just roll the wheel. So I'll roll the wheel and use shift and the middle mouse button. So if I want to go, let's say over here, I'd zoom out a bit. If you pick on the point, it will rotate around that point. Hold my middle mouse button, come round, bosh, and then just zoom in. Okay, so that's how you move around the viewports. Last thing in this one, well, there's a couple of little things, but let's just discuss these axes. It's very important in 3D space to understand and get used to the axis. It's not at all difficult, and it becomes natural very quickly. But in Blender specifically, because different softwares have different axis names. I mean, they're all X, Y, Z, but in Cinema 4D, for instance, if I remember, Y is actually pointing upwards and Z is pointing backwards. But we're using Blender, so the up-down is the Z-axis, the blue one. Forward backwards is the Y-axis, the green one, and then left and right is the red axis, the X. So you've got your X, your Y, and your Z. And what's important to learn very quickly, very early on, is that this is the global axis. These lines will always be here unless you don't want them there. You can get rid of them, but in terms of, yeah, they're always going to be here to remind you what the global axis is, which way is up, which way is left, which way is forwards and backwards. These will never change. The global axis is set. It's like Earth. Nobody can suddenly say up is no longer up. So the global axis will never change. But what's important to learn when you're dealing with 3D modeling is that if I rotate this cube like this, I've just rotated it randomly. I haven't done it. Well, actually, let me show you one thing first. To move something on an axis, so on the global axis, I would like to move this cube up the Z-axis, but I want it to go directly up, because if it goes slightly to the left, it might be blocking a tree. If it goes slightly to the right, it might be blocking something else. So I need to know it's going directly upwards. So if I press G to move and then press Z, I'm telling it nothing, do not move on any other axis at all. Don't do that, okay? So that'll mean you can move up and down, move your mouse over here, it doesn't matter. Same with any other axis. Any axis you want to move on, just press your move key followed by the axis you want to move it on. And the same applies for rotating. If I want to rotate on the Z axis, doesn't matter where I go, I'm not going to be able to do it anywhere other than the Z. And on this one I'm doing the X, and then here I'm doing the Y. Again, the same applies for scaling, but scaling actually deforms the object. So if I scale and press Z just on the Z axis, I'm going to get a column. So you're manipulating the shape, changing the shape without even editing the vertices inside. Same for the X, same for the Y. And with scaling, a good tip to use is if I want to scale this up on the X and the Y, so I want it to spread out, but I don't want it to get taller, I can tell it to scale on every axis apart from the Z, just by going S, Shift, Z. That Shift Z says don't go up and down. So if I scale it, you can see it's not going to get taller at all. It's just going to get wider and longer. So that's useful to know if you want to scale something on one axis, on two axes, but you don't want it to scale another. Just press Shift and then the corresponding axis. Okay. So look, we're not nearly done on axis, but what you can see here in the middle of my cube, if I move my cube on the X, this axis is local to this cube. At the moment, because it's just been brought into the scene, it's sharing the world, the global axis. So it pointing up is the same as the world pointing up. If I rotate it, say on the Y-axis, and let go, it's still pointing up. So you would assume if I press GZ, it's going to go up, of course. But what if I wanted to scale it on the Z? I wanted to make it a column again. If I press SZ now, that's not at all what I'm looking for. It's scaling on the global axis. It's not scaling on its own axis. If you're up here, you'll see global and then you'll see local. If I click local, I'm switching to this axis. So now you can see that's rotated to match the cube. So when I rotated the cube, the axis rotated with it because it's the local axis. So now, if I try and scale it on the Z-axis to make another column, I can, in position, because it's following its own axis, this Z-axis, not the global one. So it's important to be aware the differences between global and local. And as I say, you can switch between them just by using that. Have a look with the logo. Last thing to talk about before we finish. It's nearly 10 minutes. These, you can change them like this as well if you want to move them very specifically. If you click and drag, you can move all at the same time. And lastly, the dimensions. This is a person. me, really, about 1.83 meters. This is a 2-meter cube. So just be aware, because scale is important, when you start with your default cube, it's actually quite big. It's bigger than a person. Well, someone who's not bigger than 2 meters. So that's important to learn. So 2 meters and a scale of 1. If I scale that up to 2, I'm going to get 4 meters because it's doubling the scale. A scale of 1 on the default cube is 2 meters square. All right, that's 10 minutes. I'll leave it there. Okay, next one, we'll talk about all this stuff, which is, well, you've got to get through it. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.